The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the bonus show. One sort of quick funny story to talk about, and then a couple of more sort of in-depth ones. CNN is reporting that 1,700 decks of cards were delivered to the office of this Washington state senator who sort of derided or wrote off the jobs of nurses by saying that nurses, quote, probably play cards for a considerable amount of the day. This is Republican State Senator Maureen Walsh, who ended up apologizing because of this comment that she made during the debate around a bill, HB 1155. And the point of Bill 1155 is to allow meal and rest breaks that are uninterrupted for nurses, as well as mandatory overtime pay for nurses and certain other healthcare employees. And she said during the debate on the Senate floor last week, I believe it was, by putting these types of mandates on a critical access hospital that literally serves a handful of individuals, I would submit to you those nurses probably do get breaks. They probably play cards for a considerable amount of the day. So obviously, talking about what probably happens rather than what definitely happens if you're making law is stupid. And we should be making law on the basis of what actually happens, not her idea that this is what probably happens. But it gets to sort of a broader thing that I want to talk about, which is there are a lot of people who are just very, maybe like sanctimonious is the right word, when it comes to what are others allowed to do during a workday that either validates or invalidates their worth, value, compensation, benefits, or whatever. Ambulance drivers, for example, have periods of time, depending on where they work, where they're literally just sitting in the ambulance playing games on their phone. So what? Does that mean they should get paid less because there are moments during which they're just sitting there? The whole point is you're available at a moment's notice. They are paid to sit in the ambulance or near the ambulance, depending on what the dispatch sort of situation is, and be ready whenever they're called. Because the breaks are there for them to sit and play on their phone for a little while, does that mean that they should be paid less or should be less protected? No, it doesn't. And that's really the thing for me here. I mean, the woman made stupid comments about playing cards, and now almost 2,000 decks of cards were sent to her office. And it's funny and it's great that people are sort of recognizing the absurdity. But this is a bigger thing about people being, I'm not big on criticizing others for judgment. We're constantly judging what we and others do all the time in every way. It's sort of a call it natural, or it's a common human thing, a thought process that we go through. But the judgment on the basis of, well, how much of your day are you sitting versus standing? Or how many breaks do you get? Or are there periods of time where you're able to make phone calls that relate to personal errands that you have to do? These are all ways that workers continue to sort of be divided from those in power and those who set up the rules and regulations as to how these jobs take place. And we should reject it all on the basis of stupidity in this particular case. But we should also be aware of the dynamic that exists where, as usual, it's all about the power structure between those who establish salaries and working conditions and those who are sort of subservient to them. Subservient, not beant. California could become one of the first states to outlaw racial discrimination on the basis of hairstyles like braids and dreadlocks. And this is a move that's designed to go to the issue of so-called professionalism in the workplace. The California Senate voted 37-0 at the beginning of the week to approve a bill which would update the state's anti-discrimination law so that the term race includes traits historically associated with the race. There are federal and state laws that ban discrimination based on religious hairstyles and on religious head coverings. But federal courts have not extended those protections more broadly on the basis of race, ruling that hairstyle is a choice. And if companies want to require workers to follow certain standards when it comes to hairstyles as a condition of employment, that's okay. But now this is being challenged, and maybe successfully. And the overarching principle The debate over this in particular is going to happen, and you can imagine sort of where I stand on it. If the hairstyle is not in some way preventing people from safely carrying out their job, then the hairstyle should be allowed. So if people are required to wear a hairnet because they're working somewhere where you need to prevent hairs from dropping into whatever it is you're working on, whether there are dreadlocks under there or braids or just long hair or whatever, if you got to wear a hairnet and it's justified, you got to wear a hairnet. But what this ultimately is about is what are called proxy factors. So proxy factors are factors that are intermediaries meant to affect a particular group of people, or that in effect influences only a particular group of people or disproportionately a group of people without actually saying it. So like as an example, imagine that I wanted to, imagine that I wanted to keep obese people out of my business. I mean, it's just an example to give you an example. It would be maybe against the law to say obese people are banned. But maybe I can get away with saying anybody whose BMI is beyond a certain amount, or anybody whose cholesterol numbers are such, even though you can have high cholesterol and be thin, cholesterol numbers can be a proxy towards approximating whether someone is more or less likely to be obese. If it's legal to categorize people on the basis of cholesterol, but not on the basis of obesity, I could use a proxy to obesity like cholesterol. It's not a perfect example. I'm going off the top of my head, but I hope I'm sort of making the point here. The idea here is that if you have hairstyles that serve as proxies to race, of course, there are people who aren't black who have dreadlocks, for example, but statistically speaking, you can make the case that it disproportionately is a proxy to black people. You can then justify the position that it is a proxy to race discrimination to do certain types of hairstyle discrimination. That's the idea, and this is what the California Senate is now contending with, and we'll see where it ultimately ends up. There's a woman from the United Arab Emirates who woke up calling her son's name last June after almost 3 decades in a coma after a car accident she was involved in 1991. Her name's Munira Abdullah. She was 32 years old when she and her son, who was at the time 4 years old, collided with a bus in their car shortly after she had picked up her son from school. This was reported by the BBC. And the boy ended up being sort of shielded by his mother in the car and escaped almost completely uninjured, but the mom suffered severe brain injury. It sent her into a coma, and she remained in that coma for decades. And the son is now 32 years old, has said that he never gave up on her because he always had the feeling that one day she would wake up. All of those years, he said, the doctors told me she was a hopeless case and that there was no point of the treatment I was seeking for her. But whenever in doubt, I put myself in her place and did whatever I could to improve her condition. Doctors say they didn't believe it was likely that Abdullah would open her eyes again. She was unresponsive. She had no awareness of her surroundings. She was tube-fed. She was undergoing physiotherapy to prevent her muscles from atrophying. And over the years, she was at a bunch of different hospitals and ultimately ended up at a facility in Germany. Her son continued visiting over the years, and last June, she was making some sounds, as it's reported. Doctors were called in, and 3 days later, she woke up to the sound of his mother calling his name, and now she is undergoing rehabilitation back in Abu Dhabi. So this is a very interesting story because some of you may remember the Terri Schiavo case. Terri Schiavo was a woman who was in a vegetative state, as it was called, and I'm sort of going from memory and remembering the specifics of it, and there was a big debate between a group that felt that she was not really living beyond the most sort of technical, basic biological sense of the word, and others who believe, sort of on the more religious side, often people who are against abortion, believe that, no, this is life, and the so-called plug should not be pulled. She should not be removed from life support because ultimately she could recover. And her husband believed that the right thing to do was to take his wife off of life support, that it's what she would have wanted. I'm again going from memory, but maybe he even claimed that she had expressed such feelings, that she didn't want to be in this state. And now you have this case making a lot of religious conservatives say, look, it happened here and it could have happened with Terri Schiavo. I actually don't know that that's the case. From one analysis I read, this situation is not that of Terri Schiavo's. Yes, this woman in the UAE was in a coma for several decades, but from what I recall, Terri Schiavo was in what was determined to be a vegetative state, meaning that there was not even the possibility that her brain could resume anything approximating normal function. With the woman in the coma, the doctors were not optimistic that she would come out of it on the basis of the circumstances. But I do not believe there was evidence that the brain function would be impossible. It was just extremely unlikely. So obviously I'm not a doctor and I'm not speaking definitively about this, but from what I've read, those who are making the case that the same thing could have happened with Terri Schiavo had she been allowed to continue on life support, which she ultimately did not, and passed away, that Terri Schiavo could have also recovered in this way and ended up simply being rehabilitated back to something approximating a normal cognitive state. That appears not to be the case, and it's not about minimizing anyone's experience. It's not about a sort of hierarchy of tragic situations or anything like that. It's about understanding the differences in these situations and understanding that the situation that this woman was in for the nearly 30 years that she was in that coma are not the same as the circumstances that Terri Schiavo was in. Again, not speaking as a doctor, but someone who spent the morning reading a few analyses of the case based on medical opinion. That does it for today. New show, new bonus show tomorrow. Next week, back in the normal studio for the entire week. Same thing with the week after that. Looking at the calendar, same thing with the week after that. And then the third week in May is when you all may have noticed that there has been no show break for a while. Pat was away for a while, and Noah's away this week, and Max has been away. But I have been here. I have been saving up, so to speak, because I knew that in late May I have a work opportunity, a journalistic academic opportunity back in France. You might remember last September I was in France for a bit doing some academic stuff there. I've been invited back. So the third week in May, I will be there, and it will sort of piggyback on the Memorial Day weekend, and we'll have some guest hosts and a bunch of really exciting stuff going on. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. More on that probably next week.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.